I've just made this very beautiful diagram explaining how a DI box works, but I want to consider quite quickly why it is used in the studio. To do this, I'm just going to hide that extra bit that we looked at the end and just consider the input and the output. Straight from your guitar, your keyboard, or your bass, or your banjo, straight into your USB audio device or your mixer. By the way, please don't use banjo in your exam, that's just a joke. Okay, so we've got the DI signal, the clean signal. What do I mean by clean? Well, by clean, it's not gone through an amp. There's no processing, by which I mean there's no extra reverb, there's no extra delay, there's no extra effects from your guitar amp that it might have, there's no extra colour from the amp. It's not changed the tone from the amp being used. It's not gone through a speaker cone that's going to change the sound of that signal. It's not gone through the circuitry of the amp that actually acts to compress the signal a little bit. It's not gone through the guitarist's amp's tone controls to shape the filters of the signal. There's nothing that guitarist, short of changing the tone controls on his or her guitar, there's nothing they can really do to mess about with the signal. It's totally clean, it's unprocessed, nothing's been added to it. So you're getting the raw sound, if you will, from that guitar. Now, actually, this can sound a bit horrid. The DI box often sounds a bit weak, but also a bit muddy. There's lots of mid-frequencies, certainly more than we're used to listening to when we listen to electric guitar through an amplifier. So, actually, the common practice is to, yes, use a DI box to get the clean sound of a guitar, because it means that you're flexible later, but also to mic it up at the same time. Your guitarist has probably spent a lot of money on their amp, and probably that amp, straight out of the box, that amp is going to sound a billion times better than your straight DI connection. So why do we even bother with the DI, particularly for guitarists? Why don't we just mic up the amp and have done with it? So, apart from the fact that there's always extra sound and bleed and noise that we were talking about, surely those problems are worth just dealing with if this DI sound is naff. Now, what's the point? Well, the thing is that once we've got this clean sound, we can then reamp it. Now, that's a bit of a strange phrase. Just move my paper. We can reamp it later. We can use software emulation. We can use basically faking that there is an amp within the software, within the DAW, within the software. There's maybe Logic or Cubase or Ableton or whatever we've got, and we can use the clever software within there to process the signal in such a way as if there was an amp to begin with, and the listener will just believe that there is an amp. And of course, if you do that, it's much more flexible. You can choose, say, which amp model you want, which cabinet model you want, which microphone you want it to try and make it sound like, where you want to try and put the microphone. And it's very clever. Within Logic you can make it do that, and lots of other software is even better than that, makes a really, really nice sound. So this reamping, this amp emulation, is very, very common because it gives us that extra flexibility post-processing. This is very often used, except for the fact that, depending on your point of view, this amp could sound even better still. I suppose it depends how expensive this was and how good your guitarist is, or you are, at manipulating the controls and getting the sound you really want, and how much you're willing to gamble getting the sound you want and not ever being able to go back and change it again. You basically lost all of the ability to go back and change it. And I suppose it's almost like the decision of whether you're going to record something by MIDI or by audio, except that, of course, nowadays you can go back and change audio just as you can change MIDI. It's not quite as easy, and it's not quite successful, but you can do it. Now, when we come to keyboards, I've drawn a keyboard here, and when it comes to bass guitars as well, we don't tend to use this. Now, your bass guitarists will, they'll just have to close their ears at the moment because they get precious about their amps as well, but this is less likely to be the case. Certainly with keyboards, we're much less precious about the amps because, in general, they colour the sound in a bit of a negative way, and actually the DI sound is likely to be better. So actually, in the case of keyboards and bass guitars, we tend to DI box straight away as a first port of call, and mic the amp as a second port of call, and that's just how things are done. Of course, all of these are generalities, things are different, people work in very different ways. There's nothing to stop you putting several mics on this and going absolutely crazy and having lots and lots of inputs going up to your mixer. There's nothing to stop your DI signal going into another load of processors, your DI link, your DI through signal going to another load of processors and then going into the mixer in some other kinds of way. So lots of ways to think about this, but those are just some of the reasons, the philosophy behind why is the DI box used and hopefully some pointers on situations where the DI box is useful and maybe where it's not useful as well.